All right, as folks are making their way back in, and I don't know if online folks left or watching the Olympics or what, but they're kind of welcome back. We are talking about this idea of emotional capacity, and emotional capacity. I'll start this way. When I was a pastor, I came across a book by Dr. Jim Wilder called The Life Model, and the book really was a wake-up call, because in this book he had divided the stages of maturity development into infant, child, adult, parent, and elder, described what was supposed to be happening at each of these stages of maturity development, and actually gave a list of characteristics of what it looked like if you had not developed properly. Now, what he meant by this was, if you had trauma in your life that had kept you from developing normally. So he said humans are a little bit like plants. Like you have a seed, you plant in the ground, the seed becomes a sprout, which becomes a stalk, which then has leaves, and then eventually it comes to full bloom. And when it's in full bloom, we say it is mature, it is complete. So the biblical word, teleos, for complete is also the exact same word for something that is in full bloom or that is bearing fruit. And so the idea it is that this seed has come up, it is sprouted, it has got the stalk, it's got the leaves, and now it is complete. It is in full bloom, it is bearing fruit. This is what maturity means. And so his definition of maturity is to be fully in bloom for your age. In other words, as an infant, we have a certain expectation. What does it mean to say that this infant is complete? They've done everything that they're supposed to do as an infant. What's it mean to say this child is complete? They have successfully completed their childhood journey. They're ready to move into the adult years. What does it look like to say this adult is complete? This adult has successfully attained all that they were supposed to do. They're now ready to move into becoming a parent. Right? What does it look like? And it was the first time I'd seen a book that just laid it out and said, this is what it looks like for an infant to be complete. This is what it looks like for a child to have completed their journey. This is what it looks like for an adult to be fully mature. And as I was going through here, he also said that what keeps this journey from happening is always trauma. Now, there are two kinds of trauma. All right, there is A trauma, there's B trauma. A trauma is the absence of the good stuff that you need. So, for example, if you're a single mom trying to raise kids, you're probably overwhelmed. You've got to work. You don't have help. You don't have all the help that you need, and this kid's going to grow up without some things that they would have had if you had had an intact nuclear family. Or if you have a really bad marriage, but you're trying to raise kids, and this kid is growing up in an environment where there's lots of yelling and fighting and anger. You may not be yelling at the child or abusing the child, but the child is growing up without the kind of stability and joy and joyful environment that they would normally thrive in. And so we say there is an absence of a good thing that they needed. So maybe this child needs a dad who gives hugs and says, I love you, or they need a dad who shows them how to change tires and how to change the oil and how to build how to do things with their hands and how to be a man, and is really actively guiding them in things. Or maybe they didn't have that, and their dad was just very passive, and their dad was absent or in something else. It's not that their dad was abusive to them, right? But what A trauma means is that you're not getting from this person what it is that you actually need from them in order for you to grow and to mature. We call that A trauma. So I am convinced that basically A trauma is 100% of people. I never met anybody yet who got absolutely perfect parenting, absolutely perfect upbringing, absolutely perfect everything that they needed. And so as a result of that, all of us have some gaps in our maturity development. Now, on top of that, there is B trauma, and B trauma is the bad stuff that happens to us. So I look at it this way, using the plant analogy. If I got a plant, then I plant the seed, and it sprouts, and the stalk comes up, and the leaves, and if I want to stop that developmental process from happening, right, I planted the seed, but I don't want it to come to full bloom, how might I traumatize that plant to keep that from being completed? Does that make sense? If I want to kill that plant, how would I do it? This is another one of those Family Feud things. Number one answer, number two. Number one answer? Don't water it. Bing, ding, ding, ding. That's correct, right? We have I would say that by vast majority, 90% of the time, that's the answer I get. Don't water it. What's number two? Don't give it enough sunlight. Number three, don't give it the right kind of soil, right? And then after that, you start getting the B trauma answers. And the B trauma answers are a little terrifying because some of them are sadistic. It's like the 7-year-old kid said, well, I would cut the thing down and set it on fire. Said, yes, that would successfully keep that plant from maturing. Now, the point here is, if I want to stop the maturity development of this plant, the top 3 ways I would stop its development is by what I don't do to it. Right? What doesn't happen to it? Not getting enough water isn't abuse in the classic sense of the word, but by not giving it what it needs, I stop its development. By not giving it the right kind of sun, by not giving it the right kind of soil, it stops its development. In the same way, what I don't get as a child can absolutely stunt my maturity development so that I don't develop the kind of relational maturity that I should. And so what happens when our maturity development gets stunted like this because we don't get what we need is we compensate. And some of the most common ways that people compensate for the lack of, for what they didn't get is that they will become very good with their left brain problem solving, and so they just retreat into a world of intellect. And everything is just thinking and reasoning and problem solving, and they become very intellectual but very emotionally and relationally detached. Why? Because they're smart and they're good at that, but they never develop the other side, the relational skills that are actually part of the relational maturity that we're talking about. So they just didn't even try in that area more, and they just retreat back into this area of problem solving and intellect. And it becomes a problem in ministry because you get a lot of very big left brain pastors who know a lot of theology, and they're very good at explaining the Bible, but they have almost no relational skills. And so they aren't very mature relationally. You see this in marriages too, where somebody has retreated into this, and they're very big left brain people. They're very good at problem solving. And so they're happy, bring me a problem and I'll solve it. Give me something to philosophize about, and I can give you a philosophy about it and explain the whole thing and all that I've read about it. But they aren't actually very good at being relational. And what that means is that their relational development got stunted because they didn't get what they needed for that to develop. Now, the other thing that tends to happen to people where the left brain doesn't develop, well, I actually got pictures for it. So we'll talk about it as we go through here. So the primary problem in most marriages is a lack of emotional maturity, which is a way of saying that we are stuck here with our capacity. And low capacity basically means low maturity. And what this means is that because of a trauma, I did not get fully developed either in infancy or in childhood or at the adult stage of life, and therefore I am entering into marriage and parenting underdeveloped, shall I say. And because I'm underdeveloped, I don't have the capacities I have, and because of that, I am more easily overwhelmed because of my lack of capacity than I would have been if I had developed all of these things when I was, when they were supposed to be happening. If you layer on top of all this A trauma, B trauma, that is bad things happening to you, being abused by people, being shamed by people, being, beaten up by people verbally and physically and sexually and all these other areas, then you end up with even more things that are stunting the development and keeping people stuck. And so it is not uncommon. Now, I know that a lot of you did not necessarily grow up in the United States, but in the United States, I know one of the estimate right now is that in most marriages, 75% of males, because of the A trauma and B trauma of their life, enter into marriage not having fully moved past the infant stage of development. And most females enter into marriage because of A and B trauma, not having fully moved past the child stage of development. And so you have a functional child and a functional infant getting married and trying to raise children. And so what happens is everybody's overwhelmed all the time. Because everything is beyond my capacity all of the time. And so I tend to react. So you think about it this way. if infants, what are infants really good at? All right, infants are really good when it comes to problems. What are infants good at when it comes to problems? Creating them. There you go. They're very good at creating them and then leaving it to you to figure out what it was they did. So the other thing infants are very good at is letting you know they're upset. Right? Very good at letting you know they're upset. They can fuss, they can whine, they can scream, they can cry. They have a dozen different ways to let you know, I am not happy. Now, it becomes your job, especially the mom, to sort of develop a checklist. Oh, when they're doing this kind of a fuss, that probably means they're hungry. When they're doing this sort of thing, it probably means that they need to sleep. And so you got to kind of figure out what's going on with them, read them, and help them. So if you get somebody who hasn't progressed beyond the infant stage of maturity, and they are now in a 65-year-old body, guess what they're very good at? Fussing and complaining and whining and getting angry and letting you know they're upset. You know what they're not very good at? Letting you know why. You still have to kind of have the mental checklist to figure out, I wonder what's wrong with Grandpa today. Oh man, what is the problem now? Well, he's not going to tell you, so you got to kind of figure it out because he's still stuck back here. It's as simple as the sort of things like, when Grandpa's stuck like this, and because he has so much trauma, it never developed. He doesn't know how to ask for coffee. He goes, would somebody please get me some more coffee? He doesn't do that. It's like, he's just kind of rattling his cup and grunting like, anybody notice I need coffee? By the time he does talk, that's what comes out. What's the guy got to do to get some coffee around here, right? It's like, because that's not a very mature way to handle that situation. But the reason there's not maturity there is that it was just never developed, right? So since it wasn't developed there, it doesn't inherently develop just because you age. And this is what we mean. So when we get into, a lot of us, when we get into marriage, we're still handling these problems. So people are like, well, what happened to Daddy? Where did he go? I don't know. He just sort of disappeared. Well, what's wrong with Daddy? I don't know. There's no knowing. It's kind of a mystery because Daddy doesn't know how to tell you what's wrong and what he wants, and this is the problem, and I could use some help with this. And so he just sort of disappears, and everybody knows Daddy's upset, but nobody's quite sure what to do about it. And so his wife has to become his mom. Right? And so the mom's now got to become an expert on Daddy's emotions and triggers to explain to the rest of them, it'll be okay, Daddy's just this way. And now the more that she becomes his mom, the more he resents the fact that he's being mothered. And now he's upset like, I didn't get married to have a mom. I got married to have a wife. So you go on, and it's like, and part of this is because at the child level of maturity, what you're very good at is you can now use your words to say what is wrong. And so, as a child will say, I got to go potty, or I'm hungry, or I'm tired, or I don't want that, or I don't like those. And, right, wrong, or whatever, they can tell you what they want. Right? So you walk in with a baby, and it's like, I wonder if it's the diaper, I wonder if it's this, because they can't tell you. But with the child, they'll tell you what it is that they, is wrong or that they need. And so you can imagine that if you have an emotional infant husband and a child level wife, she's really good at saying, I need you to do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. Why, I need this, I need that, I need this. And he's going, oh, please just leave me alone. Right? Because that's like the classic nag, 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 And so what I realized is after learning this model as a pastor, I watched the next 3 couples that came to me for marriage counseling, and I saw exactly that pattern every time. I heard a wife saying, when is my husband going to grow up and take some responsibility around here? And I heard a husband saying, my wife used to be fun. Right? She's forgotten how to have fun. It's like, it's just on me all the time, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, this makes a lot of sense. You got to figure out the goal here is we've got to grow our capacity to be ourselves and to grow in our maturity, which is where that first session comes from. So what does maturity look like? It's the ability to remain relational when there's problems and not just retreat into a world of intellect. It's the ability to act like myself when there's problems and not turn into somebody else. I've got to grow my capacity to do that and not just excuse the fact that I don't and saying, well, that's just who I am. Because if you say, well, it's just who I am, and you're just going to have to get used to it. I just don't talk about my emotions. I just don't deal with those sorts of things. That's actually not true. That is not you acting like yourself. That is actually you malfunctioning and excusing it. So what we need to do is we need to learn how to acknowledge that this actually isn't normal behavior, even though it's typical behavior. This is, we don't want to be typical, right? We want to be growing beyond that. So what that means is I got to start by acknowledging that I actually do have a problem. And then I've got to go back and say, what was it that I missed growing up? And what are the things that what are some skills that I'm now going to have to start growing in my life because I didn't grow up with them? Does that make sense? So we'll talk about what some of those skills are as we go. I said the typical marriage in America, right? We have a infant-level husband and a child-level wife. So infant maturity, we said, the infant, my job is to let you know I am upset. Your job is to figure out why and fix it. Right? Now, I do this in leadership settings, too, because sometimes you have bosses like this. And everybody knows their executive secretary is basically their mom. Right? So...
I'm just wondering why men regress more often to infancy, and then is it like psychosocial?
Yeah, the reason men tend to progress to a lower level than women is because culturally, women tend to get more relational training and more relational experience than men.
Even though women are more at risk for the past B trauma, though.
Women are at more risk for the B trauma,
Yeah.
but they tend to get less A trauma, if in the sense that, going back to even the way that boys and girls play together. So they did a study of 4-year-old boys, 4-year-old girls. When the girls played together, 100% of the sounds that came out of their mouth were words. Right? When the boys played together, only 50% of the sounds that came out of their mouth were words. You know, the rest of them, and it's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's part of the difference between guys and girls. But the other thing they found is that when the boys were playing and they would talk to each other, they would glance occasionally at the other kid while they talked. Whereas when girls would play, they would turn shoulder to shoulder, eye to eye, and they would talk to each other like this. And so part of it is that just culturally, girls, just the way they're wired, tends to be a little bit more relationship is important to me. And also then in the culture that tends to get supported a little bit more. And so the idea that I should be talking about my emotions with somebody and engaging with them relationally with eye contact is a little bit more ingrained into women than it is into men, just culturally. And also to a little bit just even in the way that the brains work. It's a little bit more that way. So what happens is that men can grow that capacity, but sometimes they miss getting that developed in their lives. That's the simple answer. It is true, though, that a lot of it has to do with cultural expectations. So, for example, some of the cultures that have we talked last night about the difference between the Israeli military and the U.S. military and PTSD. And the numbers are that the U.S. military, almost 40% of soldiers get PTSD. And in the Israeli military, it's less than 5%. So the question here is why? Right? Is war less horrific? No. Do they have better training in boot camp? No. The difference is the culture. And that is in Israel, the culture is much more relational. And that is, you are on a weekly basis, typically in Israel on a weekly basis, your extended family is going to get together and you're going to see your people every week, right? They spend a whole lot more time socially and relationally engaged just as a culture with other people. And as a result, and also everybody in Israel is in the military at some point in their life. So when you come back from your time in the military, you're surrounded by people who know what it's like to be in the military. And you're surrounded by people who have had the similar experiences to you, and you don't suffer alone. And people who don't suffer alone tend not to get PTSD. But people who suffer in isolation, it is the isolation actually creates the PTSD in some cases, It's actually what takes it to a whole nother level, because there's nobody else who gets this. There's nobody else who understands. You know, I'm all alone in this. And so that's part of what we're talking about with, I forget what it was that brought up the issue. What brought that up?
Cultural differences.
Yeah, cultural differences. Thank you. So do you know which country in the world was voted the happiest place to live 3 of the last 4 years? Pardon me?
Iceland or?
Yeah, it was actually Denmark, but it probably also depends on which poll you saw. But again, a lot of what happens is so somebody did a study, what's life like in Denmark, that they keep winning this poll. And what they found was a couple of things in common, and that was almost every Sunday there was extended family gathering. You know, so every Sunday at somebody's house, the whole family was gathering, cousins and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and whatever. And there would be 30, 40 people there. The kids all be running around together and playing. You know, there's talking and there's all this. And it was just like every week you knew this was going to happen. And it was just typical on a Friday or a Saturday that you would have company over for dinner. Right? We're going to spend time socially, you know, doing things relationally with people. We're going to cook together, you know, we're going to make this stuff together. We're going to prepare, you know, but, and there was also kind of a norm that this wasn't going to go on for 6 hours, right? This was going to go on for 3 hours, you know, and then we'd be done. And then, you know, I'm going to go take a run in the park. I'm going to go work out. And there was a lot of physical exercise as part of their lifestyle. And what they found was that it was this rhythm that was created. And it was a rhythm that was very relational. And it was a rhythm that said, I've got alone time where I can just read book, where I can take walks by the river, where I can go work out. And I've got people time. And I know I can look forward to the people time, that there's going to be people that I like hanging out with, that I can be with. And when you have community, and you've got family, and you've got rhythm, and you've got rest, that tends to create a greater amount of emotional capacity, because when you go through suffering, you never go through it alone. There's always going to be people around you who are with you in that suffering. And it's that community around you and the people who are with you in your suffering that keeps that suffering from becoming trauma, that does damage to who you are as a person. So, infants who go through all of this stuff, and they got all these whiny, fussy, cryy emotions. If they don't have extended family around, you know, because let's face it, it's exhausting to mom to always be the one 24 hours a day, to have to go there and say, okay, I'm happy to see you, it's going to be okay. That's why you want grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles and, you know, older brothers and sisters and whatever, you know, all you need. That's why, you know, having lots of people to give smiles and to take care of kids and help them return to joy, all of that. If the infant gets all of that, chances are they're going to be emotionally stable for the rest of their life. But if the infant doesn't get that, now infancy, just so you know, would go up to, say, the biblical idea would be up to weaning, to when you start solid food. So and you stop breastfeeding, or that would be the typical. So when you stop breastfeeding would be the end of infancy. And so for typically in most cultures, that's about age 2 into age 3 at the latest. So we talk in our culture a lot about terrible twos. And the terrible twos, really what's going on there is that around age 18 months, for the first time, infants can experience extreme emotions. And what we mean by that is before that they can be afraid, now they can be terrified. Before they could be angry, now they can feel rage. That's why your adorable little 2-year-old can look at you and go, I hate you, you're the worst person ever, right? And you're like, where did that come from? And how we respond to their really big, huge emotions is going to set the stage for their emotional stability for the rest of their life. And so if they go, I hate you, you're the worst person ever, and we go, smack, don't you ever talk to me like that again, you know, go up to your room, and we send them into isolation, what have they learned? They've learned, daddy's scary, mommy's scary, and I better never bring something like that up again, but they have no idea how to return to joy from that emotion. It now becomes an off-limits emotion. And there's a difference between an off-limits emotion and an emotion that I can return to joy from. So the goal is we want to help all of our children at this important age learn that, wow, so you're really mad, you're really angry. He said, okay, I can understand that, but when you're really angry and rage, it's still not okay to say what you're saying. That is not all right. It's like you can correct them, and then you want to guide them back to, this is how we handle it when we feel that emotion. This is what you're feeling right now. Give them a name for it. But this is not how we handle it when that happens. We do this direction, and now you relationally walk them back to the proper behavior, proper correction, and then your goal is to get them back to where their emotions are small enough that it's within their capacity now to act like themselves again. And if that happens again and again, they're gradually going to learn not to be afraid of that emotion, but that it's okay, I can actually stay relationally engaged and act like myself when that emotion happens. I can return to joy from it. Yep.
So boys who are taught to suppress certain emotions get stuck in it. And therefore, as adults, we tend to, in situations, because we are taught to suppress certain emotions, it's hard for us to connect with them.
Yeah, for those who couldn't hear that or weren't on the camera, basically, marriage and family therapist, tell me your first name again. Don was explaining that there's a layer on this too, that culturally, especially in America, and there's other cultures around that do this too, that the expectations emotionally for boys and girls are different, and that boys are actually actively discouraged from being able to feel certain emotions. It's like boys aren't allowed to cry, for example, is the, big boys don't cry, is the feeling that it's not manly to have that emotion. And so instead of being taught how to handle the emotion and return to joy from it, they're just told they're not allowed to have the emotion. And if you're not allowed to have an emotion, guess what happens when you feel that emotion? You get stuck, right? Things shut down and you don't know how to act like yourself. So what Dr. Wilder has taught me on this is that from a right brain perspective, there are 6 great big negative emotions, and each one of them is a destination from which we need to learn how to return to joy. So, for example, shame. If I feel shame is that feeling that makes me go, I'm not making you happy. I don't bring you joy. Now, there are times when we all need to learn how to feel shame. Okay? And that there needs to be times when your little kid goes, daddy's not happy with me, mommy's not happy with me. But what I'm supposed to do from that is kind of walk them relationally back to, well, how do you deal with it when you feel shame? Let's go and correct this problem, and let's get you back to joy and understand that shame is not the end of the world. So if I feel shame, I need somebody to be relationally happy to be with me and to guide me through what it looks like to handle it, and so that I don't become afraid of shame, as well, shame is the forbidden emotion. I am not allowed to feel that emotion. Because if I'm not allowed to feel shame, then what will happen is I simply grow up without the capacity to deal with it. And if I grow up without the capacity to deal with shame, then I will, above all other things, try to avoid anything that would bring me any kind of shame, because I have no idea what to do with it if I feel it. Another emotion would be anger, right? Some of us are taught you're not allowed to be angry. Only mommy and daddy can be angry. You can't be angry, right? And if we're taught as little kids, you can't be angry, then what I learn is I have no idea how to deal with my anger. What's supposed to happen is I'm supposed to have somebody meet me, let me know, you're really angry, aren't you? Yeah. Okay, so this is how we handle our anger, and give them healthy ways to handle their anger and help them return to joy so they're not overwhelmed by that and stuck there.
Isn't there, besides naming what they're feeling, isn't there like the stage before you get to fixing the problem, isn't there meeting them in the anger to let them know that it's okay?
Yeah.
Validating what they're feeling.
Yeah. No, I was trying to remember if I have this slide in here, and I don't, so I will walk through it more specifically. The actual process we're talking about, we call VCR. Now, I don't know if you all know what a VCR is, but, you know, old technology. But in our case, VCR means validate, comfort, recover. Right? Validate, comfort, recover. Now, validation is where you meet somebody in their upset emotion and name it accurately and how big it is. So with the little kid, it's like, wow, you're really angry, aren't you? I'm coming down, I'm meeting them in it, I'm staying relationally engaged with them, and says, that's a lot of rage. Wow, that is really big. You probably feel like breaking something right now. You probably feel like you need to, you could just kill somebody, right? You're so mad, right? Anger. That's validating, it's meeting them in the emotion. You don't have to agree that they should be feeling that. You're just accurately naming that this is, in fact, what they're feeling. That's validation. This is what you're feeling. And this is how big that is. Now, if they're really angry and they're really rageful, and I go down and say, wow, you're really scared, aren't you? They're like, what? You know, you don't get me at all. You know, so you have to be accurate, right, with the emotion. And then that's a form of curiosity too. I'm curious what you're feeling. Like if you're not sure what the emotion is, you use curiosity like, wow, you seem to be really troubled by something. Help me to understand what's going on. Help me understand what your big feelings is here, because you want to be accurate about what the feeling is. And then you want to comfort them by saying, all right, first of all, it isn't going to kill you, or we're going to make it smaller. So what it's not going to do. You're not going to die. I don't think we're going to have to go to the hospital, right? You know, I don't think we're going to have to, you know, do anything serious here. I think we can handle this ourselves. And said, what if we, and you give them a solution. You give them a solution or a perspective that doesn't necessarily fix it all, but what you're trying to do is make the problem now small enough that they have the capacity to handle it and still be within their capacity. Like, okay, I think I could handle that. Right? Because when they're starting off, it's this big and it's way past them and they have no capacity to handle it. And so what you're trying to do is make this problem small enough that they go, okay, I feel like I could handle that, and now I can return to joy, I can act like myself again, and I can feel like myself again. And so we've all seen it. It's like the child comes and they've been out playing and they trip and they fall and they rip open their knee and there's blood coming out. And for the first time, they're seeing blood come out of their body and they're, you know, they're freaked out, they're scared to death, and they come running home, mommy, mommy, mommy. And you're like, you don't go, oh, you stupid kid, that's not that bad. Right? That's not what we do, is it? Not very often, anyway. What happens is the kid comes running home and you go, oh, that looks so painful. That must really hurt. Are you scared? And you're like, oh, you're meeting him in the emotion. You're identifying what the emotion is, how big it is. He said, well, come here. We're not going to have to. I don't think we have to take you to the hospital. Well, maybe we will. That is kind of deep. But you know what? It's like you're not going to die. It's going to be okay. You're not going to lose your leg. We'll get this thing taken care of. And because I know when I was 7 years old, I had 7 stitches over this eye. When I was 8, I got 5 stitches here, and I had 4 stitches here, and I got I led our family Olympics in stitches. I was the so my parents couldn't always just say, well, we don't have to go to the hospital, because I regularly was going to the hospital when I was a kid. So but they would be like, but it's okay. We're gonna go with you. We'll be with you through this whole thing, and it's going to be all right. They're not going to do this. They're not going to do that. This is what it's going to be like. And what you're doing is you're trying to comfort them and help them. Okay, I'm going to be okay as I go through here, because 1, I won't be alone. Somebody understands, and 2, this is going to be within something I can handle, and so I can get back to being myself. By the end of the day, I might not be out running around anymore, but I'm happily playing some other game and doing something, and I have returned to joy. So that's the pattern. Validate, comfort, return to joy. And so this has to happen for all of these big 6 negative emotions. I have to learn how to validate shame, comfort from shame, and return to joy. And it has a separate skill from validating, comforting, and returning to joy from anger, which is a separate skill from validating, comforting, and returning to joy from fear. And so we have to meet our children in all of these emotions, validate those emotions for them, help to comfort them from them, and help them return to joy from them, which is very difficult if you can't do it for yourself. Right? So if you are stuck and you can't handle fear at all, it's going to be very difficult for you to meet your child in their fear and help them return to joy. And so sometimes what parenting does is it exposes for us things that we need to be working on. Like, you know what? It is really hard for me to connect with my child when shame is around. Well, that might be the sign that's because you have a trauma related to shame. You weren't given what you needed in order to know how to validate, comfort, and return to joy from shame for yourself. And this is huge. And so we begin to kind of pay attention to what emotions trigger you to turn into a different person most often. It might be different for different people. For some people, it'll be anger. It's like when anger is in the room, I lose it. I have no capacity to deal with anger. Maybe that's you. Or maybe it's for you, it's fear. Like if somebody's really scared or something makes me really scared, I just shut down, I turn into a different person, I don't know how to stay relational, I get overwhelmed, it's all done. Or maybe for you it's something else. But there's these 6. I call them sad is the 6 big negative emotions. Here, I'll write them out. Sadness, anxiety, despair, shame, anger, and disgust. Now, anxiety and fear we'll lump together. I just use this because I can remember sad, right? So it helps me remember it. So sadness is one emotion that we all have to learn how to feel, validate, comfort, and return to joy from. Anxiety or fear is another emotion. We all have to learn how to do these for ourselves, and we have to learn how to help other people do it, especially as a parent. So sadness, anxiety, despair, shame, anger, and disgust. Now what you'll notice here is that anxiety and anger are what we would call high energy emotions. Right? They shoot adrenaline through your body. They make you, kind of shake, and it's like you have energy. Do you want to do something? The other 4 are what we would call low energy emotions, and that is they tend to suck energy from you so that you don't feel like doing anything. When you're feeling despair, you don't feel like doing anything. When you're feeling sadness, you don't feel like doing much. When you're feeling shame, you're like, you're limp. You're not feeling like doing a whole lot. So if you're feeling anxiety and despair at the same time, let's say that you're feeling anxiety about the level of money in your bank account and you're feeling despair that it's never going to change, it's hopeless, then basically the anxiety is like stepping on the accelerator in your nervous system, and the despair is like slamming on the brake in your nervous system. So you know what happens to your car when you do that. And you're going to step on the gas and the brake at the same time. It just revs up and shakes. And so what happens is when you carry a lot of these emotions inside very long, your body starts breaking down. Your emotional capacity starts breaking down because it becomes very overwhelming. In fact, we call the combination of anxiety and despair dread. I'm overwhelming dread of this sense of impending doom because I see the anxiety, the fear coming, and I'm in despair about it. And so, learning how to say this is what I'm feeling, validate my own emotions, and comfort myself and return to joy is a skill that we're supposed to get mentored in infancy. Right, at age 18 months, when those great big extreme emotions first start, parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and the people are supposed to recognize what's happening with us, meet us in those emotions, and help us recover, so that as we get older, those things aren't overwhelming to us. We can feel those emotions, but they don't control us. They don't turn us into a different person. That's why some people can get sad and they cry and they weep, but they're immediately relational with the people that they're around them. Even while they're in their sadness, they're still relationally engaged because sadness doesn't turn off their circuits. There's other people who, when they feel sad, they shut down, they isolate, and they can't be around anybody. Why? It's because, pardon me? Does drama? Well, drama is not an emotion per se. Drama is a response to the emotions. In other words, you get drama when you can't deal with these. So if somebody's feeling shame or they're feeling disgust and they don't know how to return to joy from it, they'll create drama. Okay? So, yeah, there's another one here, and that is attachment pain. And the difference between this one and the other ones is this: if you're doing brain scans, you could watch the brain doing something here. This is just something that's not happening, and that is, I want to be bonded to somebody who isn't available to me for some reason. That creates deep attachment pain. So if I really want to be close to my husband, but he's simply emotionally unavailable to me, that's an extremely painful marriage. If I want to be emotionally attached to my child, but my child doesn't seem to have any interest in me, is upset with me and angry with me, it creates pain. Attachment pain, because I want to be bonded to that person and not. Or if I want to be with my mom and my dad, but I can't because they're on the other side of the world and I'm over here, it causes attachment pain because I can't be with the person that I want to be with. And so for whatever the reason, or maybe somebody's passed away and they're not available anyway, or there's a divorce that happened, all kinds of things, they create attachment pain. And attachment pain is the deepest of all of these big 7 emotions. And so helping children with their attachment pain is also extremely important. But in marriage, if you're going to understand what is it that causes my circuit to go off? For most of us, our circuits go off because one of these emotions has gotten triggered and we don't know how to get back to joy from it. And so beginning to pay attention in your own life to which of these emotions do I handle better than others? And which one of these emotions make me make the circuits go off and I turn into somebody I don't like, and which one of these emotions do I handle pretty well? And then the next thing I want to do is start looking around and say, who actually does handle that emotion pretty well? Because the way that your brain learns how to handle these things is that your brain can only learn how to do this one way. And it's not by attending a seminar or reading a book. Right? The only way that your brain can learn how to return to joy from one of these emotions is by watching somebody else do it. Because this part of your brain is comprised of what's called mirror neurons, and the only way mirror neurons learn is by watching. So if you grew up in a home where nobody ever returned to joy from anxiety, your little brain never learned how to do it. Right? If you grew up in a home where nobody knew how to return to joy from shame, your little brain never learned how to do it. Unless you happen to have a friend who had a family that they were good at it and you got to see it there. So our kids, as they're growing up, they're looking to us as, how does daddy handle shame? How does daddy handle anger? How does mommy handle fear? And their brain is watching you and they're going, oh, so that's how you do it. And they kind of create a little version copy of your brains. They're going, oh, so that's how you do it. And I grow up, and if nothing changes and I don't do anything to develop new skills, I'm going to stay that way for the rest of my life. So it's important for us to begin to say, I'm the only one who can take the responsibility for identifying what has happened and begin doing something differently. So this is why I say joy isn't just a choice. Because if I have severe problems getting back to joy from anger, and I'm in an anger upset place, telling me just choose joy is meaningless because I have no ability to do that. So what I need to do instead is I've got to actually learn that skill of how you do that. And then I can start choosing to do the things that lead to joy. But you can't just choose happiness or choose joy. It doesn't work that way. So these are the capacities we want to be building in our kids, and these are the capacities that we all need to be fully functioning relational adults. But if we look at them and realize I'm missing some of them, then what that tells me is that's where I need to start growing. So again, I said my dad is 93 years old. When he was 80 years old, he came across this teaching and realized that he did not live with a lot of joy. And he decided at age 80 that he was going to start smiling more, and that he was going to start being more relationally engaged with the people around him, that he was going to start conversations, and now at age 93, he is actually the happiest I've ever known him to be, which is really remarkable. I mean, he's lost 3 wives who died. Just 6 months ago, his 3rd wife died. He's been through a lot of pain, and he's been through a lot of heartache, but it's not that he doesn't feel that pain or feel that loss, but he's able to return to joy from it and experience joy with people at a level I've never seen out of him before. And it's because he began recognizing, I'm missing this and I need to start working on it. So when we talk about infant level maturity, infant level maturity is directly related to these things, and the question is, do I handle these emotions like an infant? If so, it's because of a trauma. It's because nobody ever showed me how to handle this emotion, and so here I am. I find myself 45, 55, 65, whatever, and I still don't know how to do it. And so that's why I'm stuck at infant level maturity. It's not meant to be an insult. It's just meant to be an assessment. This is where I'm at. So we go up to the child level. Child level, my job is to let you know what I want. Your job is to make it happen. And again, I tend to use these slides in leadership circles because we all have bosses like that. They're very good at telling everybody what to do, but they aren't that good at taking care of the people. So what happens when you work for somebody who's constantly giving you jobs to do, but is never doing anything to kind of make you feel like you're being invested into? You begin to resent all the jobs that you're being given because you don't feel like there's a corresponding investment. Same thing with parenting. If as a parent, all I ever do is tell my kids what I want them to do, I need you to do this, I need you to do this, I need you to do that, but they don't feel a corresponding investment into their heart and into other areas of their life, they just end up resenting it. And that's why child level parenting tends to create resentful kids. Whereas infant level parenting tends to create out of control kids because nobody ever tells them what to do. Right? In fact, we even see that in the Bible. David says about one of his sons, says, David never told him no. What's that mean? David functioned like an infant when it came to parenting that son. He never told him no. He never gave him any rules, never said these are the ground rules. And then at a child level, all I do is I give the rules, but I'm not giving adequate investment into them. The other thing that tends to happen with little kids like this is that too many parents use their babies to make them feel better instead of being the strong one to be available for their baby. And so if I feel like I'm lonely and I'm depressed and life is overwhelming, oh, but I have this cute, adorable baby. Oh, come here and make me feel better. Oh, thank you. And we can end up, and what we do is we ask the baby to synchronize with my emotions instead of going, oh, I see the baby's upset. I need to synchronize with their emotions and be there for them when they need me. One of the catastrophes in our culture today is that we are breeding a whole generation of people at infant level maturity because we have parents who are using their kids instead of parenting them. And it keeps them stuck down here at that level of dysfunction. Now where we want to go, right, is we want to get up to adult level maturity and to a new start on how we get there. So the remaining sessions are all going to be about, all right, what are some practical things I can do to begin dealing with the things that have me stuck? What are some things that I can do that will help me to begin growing new skills and walking with new strength? So we'll break for lunch, and we'll come back. Are we doing lunch here?
Maybe keep some questions.
Oh, it's still on the way? All right. So do we have any questions on this? Because I'm sure this was, I know. For some people, I've heard it all before, and some people... New hormones and chemicals for the first time are creating emotions they've never had before. And so that's why we call them the terrible twos, because they're now having these extreme emotions from about 18 months to 24 months and on. And so if they don't have somebody meet them as those extreme emotions and help them recover from them, they never learn how to do it. And that's why emotional stability for a lot of people is essentially set by the time they're 2 or 3 years old, if they don't do something reparative to correct that.
I like the point. My wife is unfortunately trapped in a house with 2 boys, and now I see 1 infant. So I think I like your point when you said that when you're going into those conversations that may be difficult, just to kind of break from that and then to focus on the things that are relational, find a way.
Right.
Pause button, and then connect.
One of the things that will happen is for both the infant and the child, the only emotions that matter are theirs. Right? So if I'm at infant or child level, the only emotion that matters in this room is the one that I am feeling. It's that when I get to adult and parent level, that now suddenly other people's emotions begin to become just as important as mine. So that's why you see kids play together. One kid can be freaking out and the other one's just happy as a clam over here playing, because the only emotions that matter are mine. But when you get to those teen years, right, if my friend starts having a meltdown, all of a sudden that becomes my issue too, because now I want everybody all of my people to be okay together. That's normal, that's healthy, that's good. Because now in those teen years, I'm supposed to be learning how to take care of more than just me. So in my child years, I'm learning how to take care of myself. What do I need? As I get into the adult years, I'm learning how do I take care of 2 people? How do I make sure I get what I need and you get what you need too? Let's find win-win solutions here. And so by the time I become a parent, I'm supposed to have several years of practice of creating win-win solutions and taking care of other people's emotions alongside of my own. If I get married and I go into a marriage and I'm still stuck where I don't know how to take care of your emotions until I have taken care of mine, and so then everybody else gets put on hold while I take care of myself. And then by the time I show up, say, okay, I'm here now, they're all in a mess, and because there was no, they've already moved, I had to move on because somebody just wasn't available there. So that's part of what we talk about when we're talking about infant and child level emotional, is that they can only, an infant can't take care of themselves, somebody else has to do it for them. And a child can take care of themselves, but they can't take care of everybody else too. And an adult can take care of themselves and somebody else at the same time. And that's kind of what we're looking for here. So you think about it this way, like the difference between a boy and a man, right? The difference between a boy and a man is a boy, a boy will see a girl and only think how that benefits him. A man will see a girl and think, how do we create a win-win thing here? How do we find something that's mutually good? A boy will walk through the house and see a mess here and see a mess here, see a mess here, and will say, well, I didn't make those messes, so they have nothing to do with me. Whereas a man will walk through the house and go, oh, wow, everybody would benefit if I would help out here and clean this up. And so men just tend to think about what's best for everybody versus children who just think about what's my job, what affects me, what am I responsible for? I just got to take care of myself, the rest of it's up to you. Right? So there's differences here. We can kind of You can just kind of take that on a variety of levels and see whether you're functioning like an adult or functioning like a child. Basically, like, are you just taking care of yourself? Are you waiting for somebody else to take care of you, right? If you're just waiting for somebody else to take care of you, that's infant. If you're just taking care of yourself and nobody else, that's child. If you're like taking care of yourself and somebody else at the same time, that's adult living. In a nutshell. Yes. Did I answer your question? Okay.
How do you, so when we're dealing with adults who express their emotions at an infancy level or child level, how do you help them walk through it without treating them like a child? How do you stop bothering them? You know, as an adult, that's obviously not an answer.
Well, no, yeah. When you meet somebody who is physically a grown-up, but is acting like an infant or a child, do you just scold them? Yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. You're too old to be acting like that. Not really. I mean, that doesn't help. You can, but they don't know what to do with it anyway. All you're going to succeed in doing there is getting them to be quiet. If you actually want to help, which sometimes that's all you can do. You know, yeah, they're going to become defensive. They're going to become quiet. You're going to create a problem for later on. But ideally, the VCR tool is literally what you got to do. Is you got to validate. So it seems to me then that you're feeling this right now. Am I correct? And that for you, this is like this big of a thing. That's what you're feeling. And you need to be accurate about it. So you start by validating the emotion correctly. Then you go to, well, how can we make this better? You know, what could we do here? How do we find a win-win here where we can make something better for you? And what you're doing is you're modeling for them something they've probably never seen before. And that is someone actually staying relationally engaged with them while they're having this emotion. And that's what they're looking for because they've never seen that before. Anytime anybody had that emotion in their past, relationship was over, you know, everything was over, and they never had a model of what it looks like. You know, why are you staying relationally engaged with me? People are supposed to blow up when I act like this, or people are supposed to freak out when I act like this. So by staying relationally engaged and validating and then comforting their brain for the first time many times will say, so that's what that looks like. And they won't necessarily even know what it is they're seeing, but their brain will be learning the more often that happens. So let me give you a marriage counseling example of this. Okay, so I was doing a premarital counseling appointment several years ago. And we had the young man and the young woman. She was just graduating college. He'd been out for a couple of years working as an engineer. And they were about to get married. And I told them, I said, hey, so do you guys have something that causes friction when you talk about it? That, you know, and they both looked at each other like, well, we know what that is. I said, why don't you go ahead and talk about it now while you got somebody else around who can kind of referee the conversation. And then, that's cute. That's all right, that's cute. All right, so then we have the issue for them was, do we build a house before we get married or after? Now, I know a lot of people don't have the money for that to be a big debate. But, you know, he was an engineer, he had a good job, and it was like, and so he wanted to build a house so that when they got back from their honeymoon, they could move right into the house and get on with their life. He even had a piece of paper in his back pocket with 7 bullet-pointed reasons why that was the only logical thing to do. Then she wanted to wait until after the marriage to worry about building the house. Why would you think that? Why might she want to wait till afterwards? Yeah, because she's like, you're going to be so preoccupied with the house building, you aren't going to be relationally connected with me while we go through all of this. So I'm like, so he couldn't get that at all. So I'm like, why don't you, let's just have the conversation and let's see what happens. Let's start with the man listening and the wife to be talking. So why don't you tell him why it's so important for you to wait? And that's exactly what she said. She's like, well, you know, the wedding day is this really big deal. It's not like it's the biggest thing ever. You know, she was kind of down. It's not like I spent my whole childhood just dreaming about my wedding day, but it is a big deal. And she said, I just kind of am concerned that if you get wrapped up in this project, you're going to be all into this project, and I'm going to be all alone on this. And instead of it being this really cool, wonderful experience, I'm going to find myself feeling emotionally detached and uninvolved. And, you know, I just don't like it. I don't think it's a good idea. And I'm just, you know, I'm just feeling it's not going to work well. So here's the question. What emotion did you hear there? I specifically didn't say the word. Pardon me? Anxiety, which is absolutely right. Yes, anxiety is actually the correct answer, right? Anxiety. She's feeling anxiety that she's going to end up being emotionally detached and alone. And instead of this being this wonderful bonding experience, she's actually going to be in it alone. It's anxiety that she's feeling. So I asked him, I said, what emotion did you hear? He said, anger. I'm like, did any of you hear anger? Okay. I didn't either. And I looked at him, and it caught me so off guard when he said anger. I said, you are either really intuitive or a really bad listener. And he said, I think I'm really intuitive. I was like, fine, explain to me where you heard anger in that conversation. And his answer was really informative, because what he said is, she knows she's losing this argument, and so she's mad. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of reading in, right? That's a lot of reading into this conversation. It tells me a couple things immediately. Number one, in his family, they did not handle anger well. And so his radar was way up looking for it, right? His radar was way up going, where's the anger? I know there's going to be anger coming sooner or later. And his antenna's up there waiting for anger. The other thing it tells me is that his relational circuits were off, because the only thing that mattered to him was who was going to win. And we talked about this more last night than I have yet this morning, but when our relational circuits are off, people become problems, and the only thing that matters to us is winning. And so that clearly he was focused on who's going to win this, and she must be angry because she knows she's losing, even though none of that was in anything she said. So I said, we're going to try this one more time. I said, this time, instead of being quite so intuitive, I said, why didn't you just tell me what she is actually saying she is feeling? And this time, I got to tell you, he hit a home run. He's like, well, you know what? She's scared. She's afraid that on one of the biggest days, one of the biggest events of her life, I'm going to be emotionally unavailable to her through the whole process, because I'll be so wrapped up in this other project. And he just nailed it. Boom, perfect. So much so, she started to cry. She's like, he gets it. Right? And then she surprised me, because the next thing she said is, go ahead and build the house. Right? She's still crying. Go ahead and build the house. It's okay. Why did she suddenly have that flip? Because she now felt like she could trust him. Right? She now felt like she could trust him because he had validated her emotions, which meant he understood. Now, I'll tell you what does not work to validate emotions. You cannot say, I understand. Right? That doesn't work. Right? Because it's actually just a little condescending. I understand, you know. So you have to name the emotion. Because if he had said, I understand, his understanding would be, I understand you're angry because you're losing. And he would have been wrong. And she kind of sensed that. So you can't just say, I understand. You have to actually name the emotion that the person's feeling and be accurate about it and how big it is. Now, I also stopped her and said, now, here, you're acting a little too quickly. Don't let him off the hook quite that fast. I said, he needs to now explain to you why this is so important to him. And he goes, oh, it's just logical. There's no emotion to it. I said, we'll see. I said, so she starts, he's like saying all these things like, well, you know, it'd be done. We could move right in. There'd be no delay. You know, I've got time, you know, my schedule right now to give to this, and we got this. And he's like, and she goes, well, she started asking questions. Well, help me understand this and help me understand that. By the time she was done asking some questions and whatever, he's like, well, I guess the thing is, I just know how proud of me my dad would be if I could tell him that I had a house built and ready for my new bride on the day we got married, and now he's crying, right? And now she's crying with him, and they're both sobbing, like, yeah, I want your dad to be proud of you too, and you know, because so now they're both crying. And what's happened is they resolved their entire issue without ever talking about the problem. They just validated each other's emotions, And the very fact that they felt understood by the other person and the validation that happened with them understanding each other was enough to say, hey, you know what? How we do whichever way we do this doesn't really matter as long as we understand each other and we're connected through the process and we're relationally engaged. That's way more important than which way we go with this. And I will tell you, they ended up waiting. Even though she said, go ahead, build it, they actually just ended up waiting. Because they're like, you know what, my dad will still be proud of me. Said, I'll have a plan. I'll explain the plan. He'll understand. His dad was an engineer. And they laid the whole thing out. And but again, this is the power of validation in this. And the more often that you validate each other's emotions, the more trust builds up in the relationship. Now, the order here is important. Validation, the V has to come before the C. The validation has to come before the comforting. If I try to comfort you before I validate you, it's a little bit like saying, what I'm doing is I'm listening for your problems and trying to fix them for you. So I talk about it this way. So if your right brain is emotional listening, what are the emotions I'm hearing? How do I validate those emotions? Left brain is listening for problems. It's going, what are the problems? And so you can tell that a lot of us, because of our jobs and our careers, have become professional left brain listeners. And that is that we are outstanding at listening for problems so we can fix them. And then we bring that into our marriage and wonder why it doesn't work. Because it's like what we're doing, our wife is talking to us, and what we're doing is we're going, oh, I hear the problem. And as soon as we hear the problem, we go, oh, conversation's over, I heard the problem, here's what you got to do. And we fix it. And sometimes wives do that to their husbands. They become professional problem solvers because they've been doing it with their kids all day long. Oh, I see the problem here. Let's fix the problem. Let's move on. And it's like and so what happens is if you're listening for the problem, you kind of stop listening to the rest of the conversation as soon as you think you know what the problem is. And you go, well, all right, let's solve that problem. We'll move on. And then the person never feels understood. They don't feel validated. They don't feel like you care. They don't feel like you really get it. And when you try to solve a problem without validation, the person leaves feeling like all you really wanted to do was shut me up. And we're sitting here going, I helped you, didn't I? I solved your problem. And they're like, not really what I was looking for. Because what they were looking for was relational engagement, somebody to be relationally connected with them while they went through this. Not just somebody to solve their problem. So the order of this is very important. It's also important in our parenting. Because a lot of times with our parenting, we are problem solving for our kids and we never validate. And so we need to learn how to validate our children's emotions before we problem solve so that they learn how to return to joy from those emotions and not just how to solve problems. Make sense? Now, it's not that problem solving isn't important. Sometimes it's very important. It's the order of this that is important. Validation and then the problem solving that is part of comforting to help somebody return to joy. Okay? All right. It looks like our food has arrived. So we'll take a break here. And do you want to make an announcement?
Yes.